G'day my horological cohorts and welcome to another quick one chapter at a time. Okay, this is the last review video in this project series. After this, we'll be getting our hands dirty, elbows deep in dime a dozen watches. Today's sacrifices, offerings, are two watches whose design I actually like. They both have an interesting way of telling the time. Without further ado, the first watch, as I think the youth would call it, is a little funky. When I bought it, it was listed as the Senobi, but when it arrived, it came with a box and tags printed as the Shinkei. I think it's having an identity crisis. This is another cut price classic, weighing in at $13.53. This watch is aimed towards women, and I think that's purely based on the colourway. However, I think this watch is universal. What makes this interesting, and the raison d'être, is the way this watch displays the time. There is a centrally mounted fine baton-shaped minute hand in bright yellow. The minute hand starts around the pivot as a yellow disc and shooting out like a lightsaber with a yellow beam. The end of the hand is radiused and fits nicely with the design. The minute hand is bold and makes no illusions as to its purpose. This really draws the eye against the mostly black background. Which brings me to displaying the hours is a black mystery dial with a V-shaped aperture that exposes a white dial underneath with printed hour markers. So, as the hours proceed, the opening in the dial slowly rotates, exposing the hour number. Apart from this aperture, there are no numbers or hour markings anywhere else on the dial. This is not by any means a complicated watch. There are no technical complications like a jumping hour, but I just liked the more innovative display. The case is a simple round shape with gunmetal grey coating. The case has a fine sandblasted texture. It doesn't appear particularly scratch resistant, so we'll have to be careful. That's not going to happen. The side of the case is flat, apart from two beveled edges. There is a short, deep bevel to the back of the case, and this is met with the case back, which is also beveled. At the 3 o'clock position, there is a small black crown. I kinda like how it's black, the same as the dial. They could have gone with a gunmetal grey to blend it into the case, but they didn't. It's out and proud. Okay, getting out Wiz Khalifa's, the case measures 40.2mm, so it's not traditionally a women's watch by size alone, but I could imagine women rocking this all day long. The lugs extend out and sweep down slightly. They do feel sharp and unfinished. The lug width, like most of the watches I have reviewed, is 20mm, so the strap options are endless. It comes as pictured on the advert with a bright Big Bird yellow faux leather strap. I don't particularly like the pleather strap, but it'll do. When this strap falls apart and I'm feeling a little more rakish and racy, perhaps a black NATO strap with a thin racing stripe of yellow will complement. This pop of colour and the unusual display shout 1990s design. Using the power of mental arithmetic, it's a rude shock to learn the 1990s was over 30 years ago. So I guess this watch has a certain retro chic about it. The crystal on the Big Bird is a round plexi at 35.5mm. It is flat with a little 0.5mm chamfer on the edge. This flat crystal makes the watch a slender 9mm thick. Turning this watch over, we see there is a simple press-fit steel back. This watch purports a certain amount of water resistance, and presumably this is simply brought about by the inclusion of this excuse of a rubber seal. Opening the watch, we see the quartz movement, nothing too fancy in here. What's Big Bird like on the wrist, I hear you ask? What's Big Bird like on the wrist, Jules? I'm glad you asked. He sits very comfortably. The lugs taper just enough to swing the straps down to fit nicely around the wrist. It's very light, so it won't swing around, and thin enough it'll slip under a shirt cuff easily. Even the pleather strap is comfortable. The strap has grown on me actually. There's no mistaking it for anything other than a cheap strap, but it's well made, well finished, soft and comfortable. At the 40.2mm case size, for me it is a little big, I admit. If they had brought out a 38mm version, I would wear this all day long. I like it that much. What I have noticed with my brief time with Big Bird so far is how the minute hand marches around the dial. I think because it is in such stark contrast to the black background that you feel the passage of time. It's an unusual feeling actually, because you can't see the hand moving like you would a second hand. But when you look away and look back, you instantly notice it has moved forward. Like the inevitability of time. The Maz review. Maz. It's a bit leery. It's cheap. And I know it's cheap because you threw it across the room at me. Our final watch came from the same seller on AliExpress, and this is the Senobi. Reference number S9809G. There's a fair bit going on with this watch, so let's take a moment to unpack what we can see. Like all the watches in this series, this is a quartz-powered analog display watch. This $18.26 beauty comes from China. When I googled Senobi, the top hit was an orthopedic shoe manufacturer. Anywho, why I chose this watch as a contender in the "how badly can I mess this thing up" adventure was because of the unique hands and dial. Like the Big Bird, this has a centrally mounted minute hand, as per the tradition, and an hour hand disc with a pointer. The minute hand is a chrome-plated baton. At one end is a red painted pointer, and the counterbalance at the other end is a simple circle that rolls over the name like a looking glass. The red pointer is in theme with so many little attributes on this watch. The hour hand disc has a white triangular pointer for the hours. The triangle has a fine outline in red. The dial of our Senobi is made up of a series of concentric rings. The outer ring is in dark grey with simple printed white dashes for the minutes, and for the hour markers there are white dots with a fine red outline. A bit like miniature Air Force roundels spaced around the dial. There is a step down to the next ring in white. Printed on here are again small dashes for minute and hour track, but what is unusual are the hours are printed in English. The next dial is the hour hand dial. It comprises of a disc in deep sea green with a finer ring of even deeper sea blue. This colourway does give it the impression of stepping down below the white hour disc. It's a fun optical illusion. Finally, in the centre is a grey stationary disc with the name printed at the top. Being in the centre of the smallest disc, the name is printed in a light font and is quite small, which I like. The watch is not shouting at you, "Senobi!" The discs in these descending colours do give the impression of a very deep sandwich dial. It really draws your eye into the centre of the dial. I do find it interesting that there are 2-minute track dials. The Senobi case is a round, flat-sided affair. It's not particularly imaginative, but it is functional. I can't quite tell what metal it's made from, but it has a blasted matte finish. Wiz measures the case at 42.4mm without the crown, and with the crown it's 45.4, so this is a big watch. The top of the case has a 2.1mm chamfer. This almost matches the outer chapter ring in proportions, so this in effect adds to the concentric ring theme. The back of the case has a press-fit stainless steel disc. The crown sticks out like an unfortunate growth at the 3 o'clock position. At 5.7mm across and 3mm wide, there is no missing this thing. It's a shame it couldn't be designed so that the crown was more hidden or located at the 4 o'clock or 12 o'clock position. I think this would have made it a lot more appealing and wearable. But the extra engineering that would have gone into that development, understandably, would have increased the cost substantially. Extending out from this commemorative coin-shaped case are the lugs. These are simple trapezoidal-shaped bars. They have the same matte finish as the case. They are functional, but not finished particularly nicely. They still have a few sharp edges from where it was cast or stamped out. The angle of these bars or lugs, we'll call them blugs, is enough to make the watch sit nicely. Sitting between the blugs is a 20mm dark blue leather strap. It's quite thick and does feel sturdy. It's a nice colour in that it matches the blue rings of the dial. And lastly, the clasp on the strap is a similar blasted metal. It's not exactly the same, but it's close enough for cricket. Attached to the clasp is our old friend, the quality certificate. Google tells me this was inspected by 008 and has a registration number of 3316800. Brilliant. Flipping the tag over, and there is the anti-counterfeit QR code. Scanning the QR code tells us the watch was made by the Guangdong Yonghong Watch Company under the Senobi brand. Rightio then. My initial impression of the Senobi on the wrist is that it wears surprisingly nicely. Yes, it is too big for me. The Big Bird was 40mm and this has another 2mm on top of that before the crown. Sadly, this is just a little too big. From blug tip to blug tip, it measures in at 49.1mm. This, in effect, makes the watch strap almost at right angles to the case. The good news is, it is still comfortable, but it does look and feel a little odd on me. All this aside, it is surprisingly easy to read. I thought being a complicated dial and having multiple minute tracks, it would be comically complicated. In reality, the chrome bright minute hand with the red pointer and the triangle hour marker make it easy to see and read off. I would have loved some loom on the hour and minute hand and maybe inside the hour roundels. Perhaps we can modify this later for fun. Sadly, I don't think this watch design could be made smaller for actual humans like me. There is just too much going on the dial to feasibly make it smaller, but I like it's a little unnecessarily complicated. It's just a shame that it's not waterproof, because that would make it a great daily beater. Thanks for watching. I really look forward to cracking on with these watches in the next episode, so stay tuned for that. Please feel free to write a comment below and hit like. And if you haven't done so already, subscribe and hit that bell for future notifications. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you next time. Why I googled Senobi, the top why Delilah. Help me, Obi-Wan Senobi, you're my only watch.